My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds are geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power. Nerds and geeks, come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and his team. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals put it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic, multiverse. It's mega Christmas, strangest franchise. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope.
And we got a special underwater microscope this week, because that makes things different.
In a manner of speaking, like I just learned last week that microscopes are generally used for biology. So if you told me there was an underwater microscope, I'd probably believe you pretty easily.
What did you think they were used for?
I don't know. Science, man. Science. Okay, so we are going to be talking about Avatar: The Way of Water today, it's a long movie, so that means there's lots to talk about. But before we get into that, we do have a special guest. It's the first time we've had a brand new guest, I think, on the show in some time. So, Beeper, join me in welcoming Hubert to the show.
Whoa. Thank you.
So, Hubert, we always ask new guests 2 questions to kind of introduce them to our listeners. We've made great efforts. We haven't succeeded, but we've made great efforts to try to differentiate what a geek and a nerd are. We're not going to go into explaining what we think those are. I'm going to let you kind of interpret this as ever you choose. So what kind of nerd or geek are you?
Right. Okay. I think probably the thing I'm most nerdy about would have to be Pixar movies, but then animated movies as a whole. I know a lot of random facts there. Not a Disney adult. I want to be very clear. Not a Disney adult. And then, yeah, probably also board games. I really like board games. I don't know why, but I feel like that's more geek than nerd. I feel like you have to be a board game geek. Board game nerds are not a thing. Don't ask me to elaborate on that.
Well, I know I said we wouldn't explain this to you, but generally part of how we differentiate them is that a nerd is someone who gets really interested in something and it's like a solitary interest for them. Whereas a geek is almost like an evangelist for whatever they're into. They want to bring people into it. And so typically when you think of a person who's really into board games, they're the kind of person who like shows up at a party with board games and they're trying to convince people to play a board game with them.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. Okay.
There are solo board games, though, I feel.
Are there? I mean, I know they exist.
There are. But the thing is with solo board games is like they're not really designed solo, so it's mostly designed as a multiplayer board game, and then there's like a solo mode that might have a couple of extra rules or things that you can play in a solo way.
A solo board game just sounds honestly depressing.
A little bit. I was just thinking.
I've done it. I've been there.
Oh wow! No, it's just because in French they're called jeux de société, which means like games you play with society or with people usually. So it would be really weird for that to be a solitary thing.
Yeah, it was during the pandemic when you couldn't hang out with people. So I was like, I'll play this board game by myself.
Well, Hubert, this might be an easy answer, but we also ask people, what kind of nerd or geek would you want to be?
Okay, yeah. Recently, I'm kind of getting into Lego, and I think I don't know if I want to get deep into Lego, but it's kind of fun. I recently bought a Lego set with my own money, and then I got one for my birthday. Yeah, I'm really enjoying it.
Be warned, even secondhand, it's an expensive thing to get into. I have, well, two of my brother-in-laws are very, very into Lego, and even if you get them at the secondhand store, it can get really expensive. And then if you get kits at the secondhand store, it gets crazy. I found we went to a store and it was like this kit that I got when I was like 10, and if I had never opened it or played with it, it would be worth several $100s now.
Yeah, that's what's stopping me from getting really deep into Lego, because I'm like, it seems too expensive. But I'm enjoying building the things that I have, so that's fun.
Well, Hubert, we're happy to have you with us today. The next thing we're going to do is what we call the Secret Origins segment, or the SOS. Someone help us. Where we kind of dig into the secret origin of the franchise we're talking about, but also our own secret origins with the franchise. So we'll start with beef pork ribs. How were you introduced to the Avatar franchise? And this is not the Last Airbender, which, as a side note, I learned that even though the Avatar movie didn't come out until 2009, they filed the copyright for the name in 2004. So when they were making the Last Airbender show, they were just going to call it Avatar. And then they tried to file the copyright, and James Cameron had already beaten them to it. So the show had to be called Avatar: The Last Airbender.
I did not know that, but too bad. It would be much better if The Last Airbender was known in people. Well, I think it still is generally known as, like, when people say Avatar, I feel like more people assume ATLA than the movies on Pandora. Oh man, I may have watched this movie in theaters, and I may have not. I don't remember. That's how memorable it was. I I think like my general, I did not know anything about it before it came out. If I did go see it, it was because I heard like all the people who were raving on and on about it, and then regardless of where I watched it the first time, I was disappointed, and I was like, oh, well, that was pointless. And I've been disliking it ever since. I mean, I've rewatched it recently, partially in preparation for this, and partially just because, well, it seemed like the thing to do in case I went to see Way of Water in theaters. Spoilers, I didn't. But I don't know. It was just, it was pretty much what I remembered it to be, only some of the details were worse, and the visual I thought actually had not aged well, and so it just kind of like ruined the one good thing it had going. So if I sound a little pessimistic about this during the podcast, that's probably why. But yeah, I don't know. It was, somebody said there's this movie called Avatar and it's in theaters and it's doing well, and I was like, oh, okay. And then I saw it and I was unimpressed.
How similar or different is your origin story?
Okay. Yeah, my age is gonna show here. I think I was 9 when the first one came out, so probably did not. I actually know. I know for a fact I did not watch it in theaters because I was not watching these kind of movies in theaters. But I remember it getting a lot of hype, and I remember people talking about it, even as a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old. Was it 2009 or 2010?
It was like December 2009. So depending when your birthday is, you might
Okay.
have been.
Yeah. Well, then I was 9/10 because I turned 10 in February. So I was probably then 10 when I watched it, because I eventually watched it at home. We have a projector at home, so I got somewhat of that theater experience, just in my house though. And I think we watched it because my dad really wanted to see it. So we watched it, and again, I was 10, so no real thoughts or takeaways from the movie as a wee little 10-year-old.
Okay, this is kind of disappointing because part of what made Avatar such a phenomenon is the experience of having seen it in a movie theater, and I never saw it in theaters either. So there's 3 people talking about Avatar,
To be
None of us
fair,
saw the first one in theaters.
like Hubert, I did see it in a we also had a projector at home when I would have seen it the first time. So I would have seen it with surround sound and on a projector. So, that's halfway to the experience.
Well, no, yes and no, as you like to say, because what part of what made like Avatar was the number one movie for 7 weeks in a row at the box office. And part of what made it such an experience is that apparently the 3D was so immersive and incredible that people couldn't help but go watch it again because they hadn't seen anything like that before.
Yeah, I remember an article that was talking about how some people were having depression because they thought that the real world just couldn't live up to Pandora, which I thought was absolutely ridiculous. I still think is absolutely ridiculous, but at the time I was like, really? Is it really that good? But again, I think it does kind of point towards that it had one thing going for it and not much else.
Well, back then, like I was older than Hubert, but back then I didn't really know who James Cameron was. So the fact that it was a James Cameron movie didn't really intrigue me. I was in.
How did you not?
Well, I probably knew, but I didn't know how big of a director he was. Like I was coming into my movie buffness. Like I wasn't quite as movie buff as I am now.
Interesting, because we're the same age, which means, at that point, I definitely knew that he was the guy who directed the Terminator movies, and
I'm 5 days older than you. We are not the same age.
Yeah, but you should have known he was the director of Terminator at least.
Maybe. Point is, I wasn't I was the kind of person who loved going to the movies. I remember, but I didn't go and see it, and I certainly heard about it because it was all over. Became the highest grossing movie of all time. And I remember, I have a vague memory of watching it at home. Someone in the family had gotten the DVD of it, not the VHS. And I just remember watching 10 minutes of it and just kind of turning it off or walking out of the room. And I, from that small experience, I developed the theory that, you needed to see this movie in 3D for it to be this amazing thing, because on the surface, the film itself was pretty kind of normal. And then that my bias was only confirmed. There was a YouTuber I used to follow called the Blockbuster Buster, and he did a review of Avatar, and he really tore it apart and made it seem like it was a terrible movie. And because I was already inclined to dislike the movie, I was like, yeah, this movie sucks. To this day, I have yet to watch the original 2009 Avatar. I have seen The Way of Water. I've seen the second one. I have not watched the first one. So
that's interesting, because when you told me to think up questions, a lot of my questions had to do with how does it follow up from the first.
Well, when I knew I was going to go see The Way of Water, I wanted to treat the social experiment of, could somebody just kind of come into the second one without having seen the first one and enjoy themselves. That was part of why I actively chose not to watch the original. And I'll admit, after watching Way of Water, I am more interested in going back and seeing the original.
Okay, so this is really interesting. We're all in different spots. We have one person who only watched the original and not the sequel. We have another person who has watched the original and not the sequel. Did I say the same thing twice? The opposite, the inverse of the thing I just said. And I have seen both of them. So
okay, this is good.
We have one of each type of person here. Fantastic.
You are our expert by default.
Okay. I like this.
All right, so Hubert, let's just start. Let's have you answer Beeper's question as we're talking about The Way of Water now. I kind of sprinkle the secret origin of the Avatar franchise into my answer. So how does it compare to the original film?
Okay, yeah. So I watched the original film, really long time ago when I was a kid. So leading up to Way of the Water, I rewatched it at home. They were very similar to me.
What does that mean though? Does that mean they were equally like your impression of the first one was good and therefore the second one was good?
Yeah, they both had the same level of mehness to them. I don't want to say that they're bad in any way. but they both felt very similar to me, which is kind of a strong point, honestly. Like, yeah, if people liked the first one, why wouldn't you do the same thing again? So I think all of the strengths of the first one, the second one has the same strengths. But for me, what's lacking from both movies, which maybe this is a dig at the movie, maybe it's not, is that, yeah, the story is very light. The story is bare bones, and it's not that enticing to me. And when I watch a movie, I'm here for the plot. I'm looking at the details, the story elements, and what the movie is trying to say through its plot. That's what I enjoy about movies the most. And that's not the focus of these two movies. The focus is, like you guys said, the visuals, those kind of elements to it, the escapism. It's more of an escapism movie. So
But
yeah, in comparison, very similar.
but do they follow up on plot threads from the first movie? Like, are the stories kind of linked directly, or is it just like in so much as they both happen on Pandora and have some similar characters?
Yeah, so all of the characters are the same. There's a couple of there's like
Well, I
this
mean,
since there's
there's
a
there's
time.
the whole crew of kids. There's a bunch
Yeah,
of new
yeah, yeah.
characters.
There's a whole new generation. So the main characters are the same, introducing a lot of new kids. The villain is the same, but now he's blue. So that's kind of fun. It kind of does scrap. It kind of what was retcon? No, it doesn't retcon. It just scraps the original concept for the reason why the humans are on Pandora, and kind of shifts their focus. So it sets up some interesting things. So I will continue to see these movies because I think what they've set up could be interesting. But yeah, motivations and stuff like that kind of shift a little bit, but still make sense.
Okay, interesting. Because, yeah, I think I might not ask my other question, which was, are any of the main characters actually likable in this one? Because I don't know. I thought that, like, you talked about the plot, but I thought that one of the bigger weaknesses of the original movie was the characters. Like, they were all kind of bland and one note and didn't really make sense. And yeah, I don't know. That was my in rewatching it, that was my biggest problem. I do remember the first time I watched it, I was like, yeah, there's no plot. This is like a lesser Pocahontas, but in space, which a lot of people talked about, which I don't think is accurate because it's not even as good as Pocahontas, um, as far as the plot is concerned. But when I rewatched it, I'm like, wow, these characters are all really unlikable. And they just, like, they're not terrible other than the villain, but he's like supposed to be terrible. But like, but even him, like, they don't really establish his motivation very well, other than he got injured when he was on this planet, so he doesn't care about it. Like, it just felt very, very surface level. And I think that was one of the things that I was like, well, maybe, if they make the main character, I think it was Jake. I can't, like, if he's a dad now, maybe his character's more interesting, a little less one dimensional. But I don't know. It does not. Your description does bode well, but maybe Average Joe has something to add to that.
So, as the person who has only seen the sequel and like doesn't have the original film to kind of compare to, I would say, are the characters likable? They're yeah, like I didn't think they weren't one dimensional. Maybe I would say they're two dimensional. Like I wouldn't say they're super three dimensional. They certainly had qualities to them. They weren't necessarily one note, but they were two note. Like for example, Jake Sully, he's a dad now, but he treats his kids like subordinates in the army. So like the way he dads is very giving orders and direction to his sons and daughters in a way that I was like, just feels like, I get that
Oh wow, so
movies kind
there's
of have
character
to.
regression.
Well, I get that movies have to, especially like where there's a big world to explore. You kind of have to lean on stereotypes a little bit so that they're not, because anyway. So
But he's from the army. Like that's what he did in his
yeah,
previous life. So it checks out.
yeah,
Yeah, but the entire first movie is kind of built around him realizing that, oh yeah, just blindly obeying orders is not a good thing. So it does feel, I don't know, it sounds like it's like maybe it was like an unintentional comfort thing that he fell back on, but it also seems like something he should be trying to move away from.
Yeah, but we're creatures of habit, right? It's kind of he was I'm assuming he was trained and formed in the military for a while, so it's probably hard for him to just get rid of all that, all his instincts and whatnot. As I said, the first Avatar film is the highest grossing film of all time. There was a brief period of time where Avengers Endgame was the higher grossing movie, and then they did a re-release of Avatar in
They cheated.
2019. So that gave them just enough money to reclaim the top spot.
Honestly, though, I feel like if Endgame did that, they would immediately topple it again, especially given the quality of the MCU right now.
What was interesting is that actually the percent, like the breakdown of how much of the movie's money came from international versus domestic was interesting, because domestically, meaning like in North America, Avatar 2009 is actually like the third highest grossing film. Both The Force Awakens from Star Wars and Spider-Man No Way Home have made more money than it domestically. But it's by far the highest grossing film globally. Like, it made almost $2 billion just around the world. So there was clearly something about Avatar that had like a global appeal. And when you compare that to the second one, people were curious, like, what's going to happen? There hasn't been a movie that's made $2 billion since before the pandemic. No Way Home got close. It got to 1.9, but it didn't quite get to 2 billion. So the question was, has there been enough kind of bad blood around the Avatar franchise? It's been 13 years. Do people still care? There were all these questions, and James Cameron, he's committed making 4 sequels to the original movie. Like, it's been approved by Disney for all this. So he has the scripts written. I think they're already filming the third one now. And in the end, this was the first movie since Avengers Endgame, which, if you can believe, it was almost 4 years ago, to make over $2 billion. And numbers wise, it is now globally the third highest grossing film of all time. So it's basically, this movie, Way of Water, has made more money than everything in the world except the original Avatar and Avengers Endgame. Domestically, it has grossed significantly less than the first one, about $150 million less than the first one. And then globally, it's made about $300 million less than the first one. So, got to give it props, I guess. It's the first movie since the pandemic to get this many people to come to the theater. Once again, it clearly has some kind of global appeal that maybe I'm just not inclined to understand.
Yeah, I think also what's really interesting about those numbers is I watched a YouTube video breaking them down. And with both Infinity War and Endgame, and most superhero movies, is you see really high levels of interest, and they gross most of their money in the first 3 or 4 weeks, which, I mean, is true for all movies, but to a greater extent, Infinity War and Endgame. Whereas the Avatar movies just had such longevity. Like, they weren't smashing week by week records. There was no one week where it's like Avatar has grossed the most amount of money in a single weekend. Those awards all go to the Avengers movies. But they have a stay. Like you said, what was it, 7 weeks as number one? Way of the Water has done something similar. So I think that speaks to it as well, that yeah, there's something about it. I would probably attribute that to fan culture in some way. Like, there's a fan culture behind comic book movies. And so fans are really excited. They say it 2 or 3 times, make all their theories and YouTube videos about it. Whereas Way of the Water might just be for a more general public that's like going to the movies on a Saturday. And it's like, I remember this blue movie from 13 years ago. I'll pop in.
Yeah. In fact, I think in its third weekend, it actually made more money than it did in its second weekend, which
crazy, like, unbelievable.
It's like usually impossible. Like, and I watch box office analysts every week kind of break it down, and usually it's like you're predicting how much of a drop a movie's going to have, because you would think the longer it's been released, there's less interest for it. But actually, no, in week 3, it made more money than week 2.
That also means that also tells me that, like, word of mouth has played a big role because people are seeing it and telling people, "Hey, you should go see this movie. Like it was good." Whereas again, if you were gonna see the new Avengers movie, nobody needs to tell you about it. Nobody needs to be like, "Hey, did you think about seeing that new Avengers movie?" No, you were gonna go see it regardless.
And another variable, this movie is over 3 hours long. It's like 3 hours and 15 minutes long. And that's usually something that studios shy away from because it means you have fewer showings in a day, which means you make less money. So the fact that it was such a long movie and theaters were limited to showing it, let's say maybe no more than 3 times a day, that again just speaks to
But
the mass appeal of this movie had.
it might have also started getting more rooms as it, because even if it's not like busting popularity, there aren't that many other movies out right now, so it might have just like pushed away some of the smaller things that were happening in theaters as well. And again, because it had a precedent of going for a long time, people probably realized it would this time again. And like, it's impressive numbers, but at the same time you have to figure that, factoring for inflation in the last 13 years and even in the last 2 years, it's not exactly the same, commercial success that the first one was. It's still impressive and still good, but I don't know, I feel like there might be something, that shows the limit of pretty pictures as the main appeal for a movie. But I don't know. But also, it might, like, I know a lot of other movies that did do well recently have been movies that were a little more visually stunning, and something that people would actually want to go out to a theater for, especially with streaming being what it is now. That probably has a lot to do with that type of a movie, like a more spectacle movie, doing very well in the in the current climate.
So the last thing I want to just put out there before we really dive into The Way of Water, yeah, huh? Is that I'm already gathering this sense that none of us think this is an amazing film. And so I want to put this idea out there. I've heard this also said of Top Gun Maverick, is that there is a place in the world for just a movie that is like, it's not meant to win any awards for incredible stories and acting performances, but there's like a almost a scientific formula to putting together a movie experience that is a crowd pleaser.
See Michael Bay.
Well, Michael Bay, sure, but he can lean into kind of like explosions and like he can appeal to a certain audience.
Yeah, but he still gets a pretty good general feel. But yeah, there are definitely movies. I mean, if you want like something that's similar but almost the opposite at the same time, weirdly, is like Wes Anderson movies, where they are movies. Like, they are doing things that you couldn't get in any other media. But they're not necessarily always something that would appeal to everybody, but it is something that can only be done that way. And I feel like Avatar, that amount of visual effects, I mean, other than, high-end video games with immersive details, but you're never going to be as, unless VR gets much better than it currently is, you're never going to get that level of immersion in a video game, because of where it's usually presented. But yeah, I mean, I'm not, in as much as like I didn't like Avatar, I don't think it's, um a movie that's hurting movies. Whereas like some of the problems that are happening with some other popular movies that are just bad screenwriting and lazy storytelling does tend to, I think, hurt generally the way movies are being made and written. But something like Avatar, I don't think does that, because it's not like, it knows what it's supposed to be, and what it is supposed to be is a visual spectacle. And I don't think anybody went into that movie expecting like expecting a bit more than that, but not much, right? And I don't think anybody would be disappointed by that movie if it didn't have a good antagonist or if it didn't have great characters. Whereas you do have a lot of other movies where, and I think maybe that is why the numbers drop. Like, you do have a lot of movies where people go in expecting something and are disappointed, or it just doesn't quite match. Whereas I feel like the Avatar movie, you were expecting stunning visuals and the rest to be there.
Mm. All right, so here's a film synopsis from Google. Jake, Sully, and Natiri have formed a family and are doing everything to stay together. However, they must leave their home and explore the regions of Pandora. When an ancient threat resurfaces, Jake must fight a difficult war against the humans. That was very vague. They did a good job of being vague there.
Yeah, I mean, that I feel like it's one of those things happened and then other things happened. That's more or less what that summary was. I like it.
So maybe this is a good time, Beeper, if you can pull out our friend Ben, the movie buff, couldn't be here, but he sent us his review, and we'll just use that as a springboard into our conversation here.
All right. So, Ben the movie buff told us, I like the first Avatar movie. I think it has great spectacle and it's pretty entertaining. I was pretty excited for Avatar, The Way of Water, but ultimately I found it disappointing. With its over 3-hour runtime, I found most of it pretty dull. It repeated some of the beats from the first movie, and the underwater scenes were cool at first, but lost their novelty pretty quickly. I couldn't wait for it to be over. I think what hurt the movie is that since the first Avatar, we've had a lot of big budget fantasy / sci-fi blockbusters from Star Wars, MCU, DCU, etc. that have been showing us some pretty cool worlds. In The Way of Water, we see Pandora, but underwater. And it's fine, but not as impressive as the first time round.
So his first comment we on the underwater stuff. The second Black Panther just came out that had underwater stuff. Aquaman has come out in the last couple years. For me, the water stuff they did in The Way of Water, it felt different enough, especially with the way that they had to kind of like interface with the underwater sea creatures to like drive them around and stuff. But for Hubert, for you, did the water stuff feel too much of what you've already seen?
No, it did. Yeah, it definitely feel different enough. For me, yeah, I don't like. I know that the way that they filmed it was like 10 times crazier than, like, let's say what Black Panther did. Maybe I would need to watch it again with more of an eagle eye. But in terms of quality between seeing Black Panther 2 and Avatar Way of the Water, it was lost on me. Maybe that's naive and I got to watch again with a closer eye. But yeah, that didn't blow me away. But yeah.
I have a question. I don't think it's spoiler, but like, do they have to interface with their braid with the underwater creatures too?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh my god. Okay. I'm moving towards disliking this movie, I think.
What do you have against that? It's like you don't see that in other things where you have to like yeah, I didn't think it was a problem.
It's a stupid gimmick, and to have it both in aerial creatures and underwater creatures makes it even stupider.
Okay, I don't necessarily share that opinion, but
I don't know. I just I feel, I don't know. It's just I remember some people trying to make like evolutionary arguments for why that happened. It's like, I really would rather, if people were stop doing that and just say it's magic, because that's what it is. It's magic, but people are saying it's sci-fi and it's not.
So yeah, it's in the title. A big part of this movie is that the people, the Na'vi from the first film who are used to being in the jungle have to relocate, and they end up getting refuge with this water tribe. The airbender references begin, and apparently the third one's going to be about Na'vi who are fire based. So I realize, I know Avatar: The Last Airbender wasn't the first thing to come up with an elemental structure for society, so I'm not going there, but just to say, like, the parallels continue.
But it also pushes the whole "this is magic" forward more.
Now, Hubert, I don't know. Again, I'm going to ask you this question. To me, like, the way that they represented the water-based Na'vi compared to the forest-based Na'vi, it actually felt a lot like how different, like, cultures and different races of humans are kind of portrayed in real. I shouldn't say portrayed. How they are in real life. It's like they were clearly the same kind of species, but they had unique features and skin tones, and they came from different places, so they had different cultural practices. And yeah, did you see that parallel as well?
Yeah, I definitely felt that. I know a big thing that the original Avatar worked on was its world building and building out a culture for the Navi people, the Navi people. Um, yeah, and yeah, trying to make their culture as full as possible, with no specific link to actual humanity, but cherry picking things and kind of putting it in a big blender. And so there was a lot of stuff from the original Avatar movie that's just not in the actual movie. But if you read like the books, the journals that like came out with the movie, it like further explains their culture. So like there's a lot of there was a lot of thought that went into the culture that didn't make it into the final draft of the movie. So that didn't really surprise me that this culture also felt very real and very lived in, I think is the best way to put it. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's a similar, file book thing that they'll sell that, dives into their culture more. And I appreciate that the worlds feel relatively lived in. And I would be happy to explore more of the cultures and the worlds and getting to know more of the people.
Now, I would tend to agree with Ben, the movie buff. I feel like the water stuff went on for a little too long. It looked amazing. Like it actually just looked like an underwater documentary. So I've heard people call that section of the movie like almost like a tech demo. It's like, look what we can do. Visual effects have come so far that we can literally make it seem like we're actually underwater in some barrier reef or something when it's actually all computer
That's
generated.
that's not bad because I don't know. The last I'm thinking about other movies that felt like tech demos for what we can do underground, and things like Thunderball come to mind, and that was just a big mistake because it is very hard to film underwater because it's dark, it's a little difficult. So that's a nice thing to have. It's more like Finding Nemo, where they just redefine how you can animate underwater almost completely, right? Do you think that's going to have the same effect of like you'll be able to tell post like pre and post Avatar underwater scenes? Or because that is a thing, like I don't know if you pay attention to this, but like if you watch an animated movie that's come out around the same time as Finding Nemo, you can usually tell if it was done before or after, because of the way that water and liquids act, and are a lot more photorealistic afterwards, because the particle, like the engines they use for particle physics of water in Finding Nemo, was made for that movie. But once it existed, it was available to most people to be able to replicate. So it does make a really big difference. Is it on that level, or is it more just like this is pretty cool and we might be able to do more?
Yeah, so that brings up a really interesting point. I think the original Avatar did, where the graphics of the original Avatar were able to create new worlds. Like you could have a completely computer generated world, in which you couldn't do that pre-Avatar. And I think I can see a clear distinction before pre-Avatar and post-Avatar, where like, yeah, you can have these very believable CGI worlds. And that's what I think the first Avatar did really, really well. So I was very interested going into the second movie because James Cameron said that there was going to be an equally big jump where it was like, you can very clearly tell. And that's what he was kind of really pushing. And so I went and I didn't feel that. I didn't feel that. I have never seen anything like this before. But again, we're talking about it being a spectacle and escapism. I watched this movie at 9 p.m. It's a 3-hour movie, so it finished at midnight. And there was a snowstorm happening when the movie when I was in theaters. So that meant I was a little bit worried about getting home. My mind wasn't in it. I think I'd have to watch it again to really answer that question properly. But for me, I didn't see that big of a jump, but I would not die on that hill.
Yeah, I can't confidently answer that either. I will say, like, I thought it looked very good for sure. And this brings up another point. I think this is definitely more so than the first Avatar. There's really only like one human character in the film. Like basically everything else is computer generated. And this makes me draw a comparison to like the live action Lion King movie or the live action, at least with live action Jungle Book. Like Mowgli was a live action character in every scene pretty much. But live action, air quotes, Lion King was basically just a computer animated film to look photorealistic. Arguably, Avatar's become the same thing because again, there's like one human actor on set. Everyone else is motion captured CGI world. And so this part of me is like, why are we spending hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars? Let's just make this an animated film and save ourselves save the world some money here.
Animation is pretty expensive too, though, when you hit those levels. So, like, I understand what you mean, and a lot of animation does actually use motion capture these days too, for choreographies, especially if there's anything that has like even video games use human choreographies for a lot of like martial arts and fighting to help with the realism of it. So, like, I understand what you mean. It might save some money, but I think also just because motion capture has become so good at picking up facial expressions, you still kind of want the actors to be there as opposed to just, film the actors and then have the animators replicate it, which is what they used to do, which, would probably be cheaper, but also take a lot more time.
Because I saw a number somewhere that this movie costs over $400 million to make. And to me, it's like, okay, you've proven that, yeah, computers can basically recreate anything or create any environment. I don't know. There's a part of me maybe I'm like old school when it comes to movies. Like I actually just like watching things filmed in front of a camera.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. If you think about like the difference between the Tintin movie from around the same time, like 2010, 11, maybe it was 12. That was mocap. That was motion captured. Why is that an animated movie and this one's a live action movie? Like they use the same technology. Yes, the Tintin one is a bit more stylized in its
And there's
animation.
there's a handful of live action
There
characters.
is there's live action. So yeah, I think that's an interesting question that I think movies will start to ask themselves. But also, you just can't market something as animated because people will think animated, that's for kids. I'm not saying that that's true, but I think marketing goes into that where it's like, no, we have to use motion capture because then we can sell it as a live action movie and then adults will see it.
Because again, to the credit of The Way of Water, a lot of stuff like it all looked like nothing looked fake to me. I'm like, I believe that this is a cat person standing on a beach with huts in the background and there's the sun and everything. Like nothing felt fake.
So do you feel that way when you watch a Marvel movie? Because it felt not too dissimilar to Marvel movies for me. But again, maybe I'm off here. Like Thanos feels really real to me.
Yeah.
I think that also depends Thanos in which movie, because there is
true
a wild variability within Marvel products on how well they do make that integration. Like, probably at its best, Marvel is, I would expect, on par with this because they do have some of the best people working on it. But at its worst, Marvel can be very janky as well.
Yeah, I think there's not a single Marvel movie I have watched where there wasn't at least one visual effect where I'm like, that looked fake or that looked rough. And maybe
so
because
consistency is hard in animation, especially photoreal consistency. Like it is devastatingly difficult to make things look like the real world without having either something like a direct reference or and especially if you're creating something that doesn't exist, making it look photorealistic is like a very difficult thing in animation. So I think that might be also part of it, is that like even in Marvel movies and DC movies where there are very, very much CGI'd thing, there's still a lot of technical aspects or like set building that goes behind it so that there's only a part of the shot that is fully CG'd, whereas this is a lot more of it.
Yeah, like as I've like explored the making of Marvel movies, I'm actually impressed to find out how much of the film is our CGI. To find out that even Spider-Man's costume in a lot of shots is CGI. Or like you know, in No Way Home, it's like in the finale, he's wearing like a version of his suit that has like a gold chest plate. CGI. Like he was just wearing the regular red and black suit, and they just added all that on.
My
So
favorite fact about that is Thor's eye patch in Infinity War is CGI, because they started filming with the actual eye patch, but it kept falling out and it was slowing everything down. Apparently, it was really itchy, so they were just like, "Screw it, we'll fix it in post." And I'm like, that is the most like you could have just used a real thing, but CGI is so common and so good that they were just like, it's cheaper for us to CGI this eye patch.
Well, it's not just cheaper. It's also like, so my wife is studying, filmmaking, and it's also a lot more work to pre-plan those things than, like, it's a lot more work for the post-production people when you say we'll fix it in post, but to plan these things out is an enormous amount of effort, and if you don't have people who are willing to, you know, put that effort up front, well, that's usually when you end up with the things that, average Joe, you were talking about in Marvel movies. That one effect that doesn't look real is probably because they had to do it in post instead of planning for it. But this movie was clearly, it took a long time to plan out what they were doing. It took its time. Like James Cameron is taking an eternity to get these things done, but into that does mean they get a lot of planning to avoid some of those issues, probably, right? Whereas like, uh, and again, because he does have kind of the control over it from beginning to end, it's not like, in Ant-Man, the original Ant-Man changed director halfway through, or a movie's going to change the producer or change things based on what's happening in the market. But Avatar is just so big, and so is James Cameron, that they're kind of above some of those problems. That, I think, that probably helps the movie a lot. And generally, I think more movies should be made that way, because you get things like, Mad Max Fury Road, which is, all, just about all, practical effects, and it looks amazing. But the amount of effort they had to put into planning that movie from beginning to end, if there would have been any of those like big problems during its production, it definitely would not be the movie that it is.
okay, because it's such a long movie, we could easily spend a lot of time uh, not talking about the movie. So we should just actually just get to. We don't want to make this episode too long, so we're gonna just go into the spoiler verse. There'll be a time code in the description where you can skip around if you don't want to listen to spoilers for this movie. It's been out for like 2 months at this point. So anyway, inside the spoiler verse, where we're allowed to talk about spoilers.
Okay. I have a pressing question.
Yes.
Is it an ancient evil, or is it the humans that are forcing them to migrate?
It's the humans.
Well,
Okay.
so the ancient evil I think they're referring to is the whole thing with like those whale things.
But that's not; those are good things. Those I think it's the humans, because okay, so the end of the original one, they actually kick out all of the humans.
Not
So
just the ones that, because there's a scientist uprising which was filmed but wasn't part of the movie, and they kick out all of the corporates and the soldiers, but a few of the scientists stay behind. Or
yeah,
we're
the word
supposed to, but
ancient is a
they didn't.
bit. I don't think that was an accurate word to use in that description.
Well, because there's this whole conflict of like that the Earthlings are basically killing these whales just for like this one part of their body, and it's clearly meant to be like a well, not clearly. I shouldn't say that. Tater Tot pointed out to me after the fact because I didn't think of it at the time. But there's this allegory, very thinly. I mean, it was too. I was thick enough that I didn't see it, but like Beeper, they introduced these like whale-like creatures who basically like the humans are killing so they can get this like one part of their body that's used for space travel.
Okay.
And there's like
Aging, I think. It
yeah,
stops
it's like
aging.
it stops aging. And there was some kind of prophecy there about like their friend. There was the one whale who was like, everyone thought he betrayed the group, but actually he was like, do you know, remember that whole thing,
Yeah.
Hubert? I think
Yeah.
that's the ancient threat they're talking about.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So
And
the
then there's like the
betrayal whale would be
prophecy
the
with like
ancient
the
threat.
chosen one, that giant glowing jellyfish that the one daughter like merges with.
Yeah. I also think it's hilarious. When I saw that whole bit with the like they kill one of the whales and the exposition is like, yeah, one of these capsules goes for billions of dollars on Earth. And it's like, didn't we already had one of these? The original movie, the whole reason why the humans are there is to extract I believe unobtainium, which is a fantastic name. Um oh, that's hilarious. Anyways, and I'm like, we needed a new MacGuffin. Like, we needed a second one, and that's not even the main plot of the movie. The reason why the humans are there are not even for the whales. It's that the Earth is dying because of climate change, so they want to inhabit a new planet. So I'm like, why are there so many MacGuffins floating around? We got unobtainium, we got climate change, we got these whales, and I'm like, pick one of them, man. Pick one of them and run with it.
Also, at this point, if this was a real again, so man, everything I'm hearing about this is making me believe that they have no they've lost all conception of what sci-fi actually is. But like, because I don't know, this is just straight up a fantasy world, right? It's like they're gonna open they're gonna open a portal from Earth to bring them there eventually, instead of bring them by ship. Is how much this is sounding like magic. Because like, I don't know, it's Mars is right there. It's gonna get terraformed way before any of this needs to happen. Like, I'm sorry, there's just no reason to go all the way to Pandora. You don't even need to leave the solar system to get a planet that can be used by humanity if they've got the kind of technology they would have in this movie, right? But also, yeah, so they just dropped unobtainium completely, but they still have an ecological MacGuffin to harvest, which is kind of weird. I don't know. Also, question: the analogy, is it like analogous to like how they, we grab sharks, take off their fins, and throw them back in the ocean, or is that
Oh yeah, 100%.
okay?
That's there. Yeah, yeah. So the reason why I was like I'm still interested in these movies, and to see what they eventually say is because especially the first one has a very big climate change message where it's like, yeah, we need to protect the earth because in some degree it is alive. And I think that's something the first movie actually has going for it. The scene where they burn the sacred tree. The most recent time I watched the movie preparing for the sequel, I like actually felt something. I was like, wow, like that, yeah, that like, I kind of hurt a little bit. I didn't feel that during this movie, but they mentioned that they're here for climate change reasons. That they're like, oh, we screwed up our planet, and so we're gonna just move on to the next planet. And the yeah, so they're kind of setting up this big war that's going to happen. So it's very interesting to see what political message the movie takes, what answers it gives to climate change, or if it's just a backdrop for the whole thing, which will be interesting. And apparently in number 4, I think they're going to Earth. Like the movie will take place on Earth. So it's going interesting places, but the movie itself was not interesting.
Yeah, like they're setting, because again, like he's got this big story for 4 sequels, so obviously
Yeah,
there were
yeah.
lots of breadcrumbs kind of introduced, and I was like, this is good. It's showing us parts of a larger world,
Yeah,
and it's
But
not
the
all.
breadcrumbs were more interesting than the movie, in my opinion.
and that's a problem, because there are ways to set up a good universe while still making a good movie, right? Like,
I mean, look,
there
the
are
MCU
ways to
does this all the time. That's like I've seen Quantumania. The breadcrumbs for things to come are unfortunately better than the whole.
Okay, yeah, but if you look at phase 1 of the MCU, they were making good movies and setting things up that may, and it's probably because they weren't sure if it was going to happen, so they had to make good movies to hype up something that would happen, whereas now they're just churning movies with random hype. But that's the thing. I still think that, especially when you're putting that much time into making 4 movies, you should be able to make a good story while still spreading, you know, or setting up what you're going to be making, right? Especially if the first one was supposed to be, you know, creating a lot of things. It seems weird that they would just drop unobtainium and just like do a time skip and then ignore everything else that the movie was working on, which is why at the beginning I asked, is there actually, any links to the original story? Because if not, which it sounds like a lot of them are either, superficial or not there, then I don't know. It kind of hurts my confidence in the fact that the third and fourth one are going to be, a coherent story, and that there is going to be follow through, because there wasn't follow through from 1 to 2. So,
I mean,
2 to 3 are going to be a
it's
lot
further
closer together.
exploring the world of Pandora. So
Yeah, but the world of Pandora, we have like basically we're taking James Cameron's word for it that he's figured it out already, but like, has he?
So what gives me a lot of confidence, or not a lot, but what gives me hope is that two and three were filmed at the same time. So three has already entered its post-production stage, which means I think there will be a greater continuity between three and four. As between one and two, it's like, the two was not conceived when one was made, if that makes sense. Uh,
Yeah.
so
So it'll
I'm
be Back to the Future a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, so two felt like they were going back to the drawing board and they were adding all these plot details in so that 3 and 4 could happen. And because 2 and 3 were filmed at the same time, and in fact, some of 4 is already filmed because they have kids in this movie. They filmed a couple of scenes for 4 to get those out of the way. So if they could nail that down and stick with this new, plot thread that they've gone with, it could be good.
And one evolution of the story from the first film that I enjoyed was it is much like it's more of a family story now. Like the main characters in the first one have kids now, and the villain of this film, he's basically like a reincarnation of sorts. He's like the brain, the or the brain pattern from the villain of the first movie in an Avatar Navi body. So it's not the same guy, but it's played by the same actor. It's basically like a clone of him. So it's kind of the same character. And then the one human character who's problem in the film is like the son of the bad guy from the first film. So there's a lot of father son,
Okay. But
mother
like,
daughter, a lot of
but
family
like,
dynamic stuff that I found enjoyment.
why is his motivation still believable? Because like, I don't know, his motivation in the first movie was like, we need to make money to do this. Does he still have the same motivation?
It's revenge. Like he wants to kill Jake Sully.
Okay.
Yeah,
But, like,
revenge, but then also the overall human motivation is we're going to colonize the entire planet. We're not just here for resources, we're here for the entire planet. So that's kind of his motivation as well. Wipe out the Navi.
So that was again something that intrigued me because I'm assuming because they're just he and Natiri or whatever met in the first film. Obviously, was there still like family culture?
Nah,
no,
nah,
nothing.
sure.
And then when we meet the water people, it's like there's a king and a queen, and the queen's pregnant, and they got other kids, and like the kids are meeting the kids, and you
Straight up becomes a high school movie for about half an hour. Did you feel that?
yeah, I can kind of see your sense, like all the kids kind of hanging out and like bullying each other, and
Yeah.
um, so any other spoilery things before we wrap up?
It sounds like the 3 hours were just so they could throw in as much as they could.
Yeah, I felt like when we got to the end of the movie, it's like not much has changed. Like the most change that happened is in the first 10 minutes of the movie when the humans come back, and that's like a big thing. And then like the characters are in similar positions. It's just set up a lot of stuff, which again, like I said, the setup was more interesting than the movie itself.
So coming around now to final thoughts, I enjoyed Avatar: The Way of Water. I'm willing to acknowledge its existence as a movie that it's there to be an experience rather than a good story. The visual effects are incredible. There wasn't a single moment where I thought something looked fake. It's not going to win any awards for its acting or its story, but it was very enjoyable. Maybe it could not maybe it definitely could have been shorter. So I'll give Avatar: The Way of Water, I'll give it a good 3 out of 4 bad cookies.
Okay. Yeah, for me, yeah, it was good. Again, my own personal experience watching it. I also I had to pee the entire movie, which also really heavily affected the way that I watched it because it's a movie about water. So I was quite in agony when I watched it. I've been meaning to go back and see it to really get that full experience, and I never did. it does set up some mildly interesting things to see play out, specifically around the themes of climate change. And yeah, the visual effects were good, but nothing crazy for me. I actually didn't like the 3D. We didn't touch on that, but I watched it in 3D. I would actually rewatch it not in 3D. So I'll give it 2 bad cookies out of 4 bad cookies.
Woo! Yeah, you want to go for a percentage? You're gonna go for just 50%?
It's going 50%.
All right, spicy. Well, Avatar: The Way of Water is, I think, still in theaters. It's still like it's towards the bottom, but it's still in the top 10.
I was kind of waiting for it to hit Disney Plus eventually, to
Which
get
it
that
will.
second viewing in,
Yeah.
because then I can pause it.
Well, that was funny. Something James Cameron said is like, "Oh, like you can go to the bathroom whenever you want in this movie," and that's like, it's like, I don't know if he was trying to say, "Oh, you'll come back and see it again anyway," or the story isn't so,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can miss a scene and still understand the story, kind of thing.
So interestingly, a little side note here is that when I rewatched the original movie, which is more or less a first viewing because there was about 10 years of time between the two, is that yeah, I watched it on Disney Plus. I started at my girlfriend's house, watched maybe an hour, then went home, watched maybe 20 more minutes, woke up the next day, watched a little bit more, and that felt just like more enjoyable to watch it so broken up because when I was tired, I went to sleep, whereas watching it in the theater, I guess this is the reality of a post-pandemic world, is that I was like, geez, I need to go to the bathroom, but I can't pause it. So that just kind of ruined the rest of the movie for me.
If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, because we got a channel. Share our posts on Facebook, write reviews, give our shows a rating. This will help all people join us inside the Bat Jar, and we appreciate it dearly.
As we're wrapping up here, we usually pull a topic out of the Bat Jar for the next episode, but like Hubert was when he wanted to watch the movie, where it's watching Avatar, I really need to go to the bathroom, so I kind of want to just say it'll be a surprise episode next time, guys. Stay tuned for more. But Hubert, we do want to thank you for coming on the show today to talk about Avatar. You're like everyone else in the Batchar community. You're welcome back anytime you want. And hopefully this wasn't too painful for you.
No, I thoroughly enjoyed this. I hope I can get in on another episode. Just scheduling is the biggest conflict here. If I'm free, I will be here.
So come back to the Batchar podcast in 2 weeks when we talk about a mystery topic. Right now it's just one of those Mario boxes with a question mark on it.
Or one of those what was that term that J.J. Abrams made up when he was writing Lost, and then
Mystery I need to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, something like that.
Retcon. We'll retcon this part.
Yeah.
Until next time, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Beef Pork Ribs.
And I'm Hubert.
Catch you on the flip side.
Not the whales!
Zoinks!